Welcome to this explainer. We are jumping right into something massive today. We're tracing the vast, sometimes intimidating, but incredibly fascinating 5,000-year history of China. As the longest continuous civilization on Earth, grasping how this nation operates right now means we really have to look back at the foundational currents that have shaped it for millennia.
So let's dive into this huge question. How exactly does a Neolithic agricultural settlement, just a group of people growing millet along the Yellow River, evolve into an $18 trillion modern superpower? Well, to answer that, we need to understand a continuous story of rise, rupture, and rebirth. It's a story of epic unifications and, frankly, devastating fractures.
To give you the big picture without getting bogged down in the weeds, we'll break this evolution down into 5 distinct eras: foundations and the Mandate, the Great Imperial Dynasties, Revolution and the Republic, the People's Republic, and finally, the modern economic miracle.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, Foundations and the Mandate.
Our story starts all the way back at the dawn of Chinese civilization with the legendary Xia Dynasty, around 2070 BC, founded by Yu the Great. He famously engineered the region's massive flood controls. This flows right into the Shang Dynasty, which is wild, because that's where we find the earliest surviving written Chinese, literally carved directly into oracle bones for divination. And then the Zhou Dynasty takes over around 1046 BC, locking in an 8th century rule. That makes it the longest-running dynasty in all of Chinese history.
Now, here's the really crucial part. The Zhou came up with a political concept that changed everything: the Mandate of Heaven. It claimed a ruler's authority came directly from the gods, but it came with a massive catch. If a king ruled justly, great, he kept the mandate. But if there was famine, corruption, or a natural disaster, well, that meant heaven had withdrawn its favor, which provided the ultimate justification for rebellion. This idea basically becomes the political DNA that justifies the rise and fall of every single dynasty to follow.
And the Zhou era wasn't just about political survival. It was literally China's axial age. The cultural achievements here were just staggering. They codified writing systems, developed coinage, and even introduced chopsticks. But most importantly, this era birthed the profound philosophical frameworks that still resonate deeply today. The emergence of Confucianism, Taoism, and the military genius of Sun Tzu, they all set the cultural baseline for the next 2,000 years.
Moving right along to Section 2, the Great Imperial Dynasties.
So those warring states from the late Cao? They were finally brought to heel in 221 BC, when Qin Shi Huang brutally unified the country, creating the very first Chinese empire. He standardized weights, measures, the law, the whole shebang. And that set the stage for the Han Dynasty shortly after. The Han was essentially China's classical era. We're talking about an empire geographically vast and technologically entirely on par with the Roman Empire at the time. They mass-produced paper, they established the Silk Road, and their cultural influence was so massive that the dominant ethnic group in China today is still known as the Han Chinese.
Propelling forward, you really start to see this continuous beating rhythm of fracture and unity. Following periods of division, you get these incredible golden ages of culture and cosmopolitan expansion erupting under the Tang and Song dynasties. Later on, the Ming dynasty revived native Han rule before eventually falling to the Manchus, who established the Qing dynasty. The Qing expanded the borders massively, cementing it as the 5th largest empire in world history.
Okay, to make sense of this absolute mountain of a timeline, modern scholars usually group these dozens of individual dynasties into 3 overarching empires. It's a really helpful framework. It organizes thousands of years of history into a first, second, and third empire, each one defined by distinct phases of centralization, cultural flourishing, and eventually the integration of nomadic groups like the Mongols and Manchus. And running right through all of these empires is the dynastic cycle. It's basically a historical pendulum. A new dynasty rises, bringing peace and prosperity, but over centuries, corruption creeps in, infrastructure decays, rebellions spark, the mandate of heaven is lost, the state fractures, only to be reunified by the next strongman. This endless cycle of unity versus fracture defined the state for 2 millennia. But as we're about to see, the 20th century was going to shatter that cycle entirely.
Which brings us to Section 3, Revolution and the Republic.
By the early 1900s, things shift dramatically. The Qing dynasty was fatally weakened by foreign invasions, think the Opium Wars, and massive internal unrest. The 2,000-year-old imperial system collapsed with stunning speed.
Following the Wuchang Uprising in October 1911, the Xinhai Revolution just swept the nation. By early 1912, the Republic of China was proclaimed, and a 6-year-old boy, the last emperor, abdicated. The era of emperors was definitively over.
But, as you might guess, this new republic faced immediate, brutal turmoil. Sun Yat-sen turned power over to military leader Yuan Shikai. But after Yuan's death, a massive power vacuum opened up. China quickly descended into the warlord era, ruled by shifting military coalitions. By 1927, a deeply costly civil war broke out between the nationalist government, the KMT under Chiang Kai-shek, and the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP. This bitter conflict was only paused because both sides literally had to stop and fight off the devastating Japanese invasion during the Second World War.
That pivots us right into Section 4, the People's Republic.
After Japan's defeat, that civil war fired right back up, ultimately ending with a decisive victory for the CCP. On October 1, 1949, Mao Zedong proclaimed the establishment of the People's Republic of China. Mao immediately implemented highly centralized state-planned policies. Campaigns like the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution drastically reorganized society and consolidated power, though it's important to note they also brought severe economic hardship and social upheaval, up until Mao's death in 1976.
And the end of that civil war created a really stark geopolitical reality. In 1949, the nationalist government retreated to the island of Taiwan, while the CCP maintained control over the mainland. Both governments claimed to be the sole legitimate representative of all of China. This historic fracture created a deeply complex and highly sensitive dispute that remains a totally defining issue in modern international relations today.
And that brings us to our final era, Section 5, the modern economic miracle. Fast forward to 1978, and a new leader, Deng Xiaoping, steers the country in a radically different direction. He launched a program known as Reform and Opening Up. This was a highly pragmatic shift to decollectivize agriculture, allow foreign direct investment, and establish special economic zones like Shenzhen, places that were kept relatively free of bureaucratic red tape. They even established stock exchanges and eventually joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, integrating China deeply into global markets.
The economic philosophy here underwent just a massive, night-and-day shift. The nation moved from the Mao era of central planning, state ownership, and economic isolation directly into the Deng era, which was defined as a socialist market economy. Deng shifted the ideology away from strict dogma to pure pragmatism. He famously said it doesn't matter if a cat is black or white as long as it catches mice. It was all about what actually generated development.
So, what were the actual results of that pragmatism? Well, try this number on for size. 800 million. Between 1978 and 2018, a staggering 800 million people were lifted out of extreme poverty. It's widely considered an economic miracle and definitely one of the most rapid societal transformations in human history.
Today, under the leadership of Xi Jinping, that very same economic engine has fully cemented China as a modern superpower. From a gross domestic product of just $150 billion in 1978, the economy has exploded to over $18 trillion. They are the world's leading manufacturing power, having overtaken Japan in 2010 to become the second largest economy on Earth, and they are expanding their global influence physically and economically through massive infrastructure projects like the Belt and Road Initiative.
So, having traced this endless river of history from ancient Neolithic river valleys, carving on oracle bones, all the way to a modern $18 trillion economic titan, we kind of have to wonder about the future. The dynastic cycle may be broken, but the momentum of 5 millennia of history remains for sure. What will the next turn in the current bring for this evolving superpower, and how is it going to reshape the rest of our world? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this helped you map out the absolutely incredible history of China.